fully responsible. The researcher did an excellent job. There's someone with a thumbs up. And Willem Lange is the host and interviewer extraordinaire. I hope you share what I do when I watch Willem, is I'm right there with him. So I was right there in that mangrove swamp, just really glad it wasn't up to here. With that said, we have a microphone, and I'll give you this one, and they'll pass it among them, but then this microphone will be used to take your questions. So, Bill, take it away. Just hold it, we'll hold it close.
I'll introduce the panelists. And Willem Lange. He's a television and radio personality and host of Windows to the Wild, and overall a great guy. Pamela Hunt is senior biologist at New Hampshire Audubon and author of the report that really inspired this film. This is the latest, the State of New Hampshire's Birds, which I think is available here, right? And Len Reitzma is professor of zoology at Plymouth State University. He's on the film. And Alexi is one of his graduate students, correct? I'll just start off with one question for each, and then the rest of you can ask any other questions. I guess, Pam, how are we doing in New Hampshire with regards to the health of songbirds this year? This is the second year you've been doing the report.
Well, the report, I don't know, people, if you've got one at the desk outside, that's one. But we don't track. Oh yeah, probably hear me anyway. I talk pretty loud. We don't track the populations that closely because the data we could use to get the population trends come from the system of routes scattered across the state, and those are analyzed outside the state at Patuxent, down near DC. And so the data that's in the report that just got out last year, and again this new document this year, are the same data. Those population trends haven't been updated yet since like 2009. So there's no earth-shattering differences between what you may have heard or read in the last couple of years and what we know now, as far as I can tell.
And Len, you've been at this for about 25 years now. What is it about birds that keeps you crawling around the woodland floors?
I think everybody in this room would agree that among vertebrates, birds are the sexiest, and certainly the ones that you're going to see the most or hear the most. The fact that birds sing and they fly means that they don't spend every waking hour trying to stay away from you. So if we're one to try to study a population of mammals, we'd have to go track them and then retrack them and infer things from your recapturing. Whereas birds, you can track them once, you can put color bands on them and then follow them and find out what cool stuff happens among individuals at the population level. So it's too much fun.
And Alexi, you're the next generation of researchers. What are your hopes and goals?
Well, I got into this because I really like being outside, and I really like animals and nature, and I figured if I could make a living spending my time outside and getting intimate with wildlife, then I would do basically whatever I had to do to make that happen. So right now I'm preparing to travel to Australia to do some field research on fairy wrens out there, and when I come back I'm probably going to try and line something similar to that up, and maybe just try and use this passion as a way to travel and learn a lot and meet a lot of cool people and other animals.
And Willem, is there one thing that has stuck with you from this experience of filming this, besides the bad roads?
You mean besides your driving, right? Yeah, three things actually, well, sort of three things. I was amazed at the apparent lack of sensitivity of the Jamaican government to the natural beauty and resources they're surrounded with, and which they're apparently destroying in the name of tourism. The tourists in Jamaica are contained within high walls and have no idea what's going on outside them. We got to look at what was going on outside, and it wasn't very nice. A lot of poverty and destruction of habitat. This in the face of diminishing water supply. Rain is decreasing every year. As compared with Costa Rica, where they seem to have a very lively sense that tourism is their future, and they're trying very hard to maintain their habitat in as good a condition as possible. Almost every hotel you go to has 6 different bins for recyclables, plastico, filtros. You put the different things in the different bins, and that seems very nice, and they seemed aware of what they had there. And the third thing was the amount of dedication and excitement among the people who are studying birds, like McNamara and his graduate students, working so hard to preserve what's left and perhaps even enhance it. Those are my main impressions. Since you asked.
Open it up to anyone who has a question for it.
I would like to know how to find that coffee more easily. I have no idea what it's called or where I can get it. Can New Hampshire TV do anything to tell us about that?
There's a picture for New Hampshire Public Television, that sounds good.
There's a guy right there.
Someone know, because I don't even drink coffee. And,
Friendly coffee at Audubon, Pam.
yeah, Audubon sells it. It's less hard to find than you think, but you might just have to special order it probably. But anybody knows better in the audience or here, go for it.
In the Upper Valley, you can get it at the co-op in Lebanon.
Oh, okay.
Across the street here, probably.
What is the name?
I think there's more than one name brand for coffee that's grown responsibly.
There's various certifications, Smithsonian certification. There's Songbird coffee, which I think is somebody else, but it looks like this guy with a sample might have some answers.
CafeSolar.com is coffee dried using the renewable energy technology that you saw in the video. It's being produced in Costa Rica, and this year's harvest will start in Honduras as well.
The integrated open canopy is a very important innovation, but trying to prevent the type of coffee processing that they highlighted in this documentary is equally important, because when you're chopping down forest for fuel, you're losing a lot of habitat. I was just in Ethiopia this summer for 2 weeks, and from 1940 until the present, they went from 38% forest cover to 3%. And the population in that country went from 7 million to 93 million. So when you drive along the countryside, what you see is agricultural land and women carrying fuel wood longer and longer distances. So the fuel that's being used to dry the coffee is as important in declining songbirds as the integrated open canopy concept. Not to take anything away from that new concept of growing coffee.
Does everyone know that these two gentlemen up here are from the Mesoamerican Development Institute, MDI. They're worth talking to. They're the ones who worked with Victor Arce developing the IOC.
Another option that I was just thinking while I was watching this movie, I usually drink 3 cups of coffee a day, and after watching this, I just thought, you know what? I'm not going to drink coffee anymore.
What role does the government play in providing tax incentives for this integrated canopy that you're talking about?
Do you know?
Or solar, the solar drying of coffee?
That is a very good question. Right now there is no incentive from any government at all to support this method. In fact, the Mesoamerican Development Institute that work on the development of this method of drying coffee in Costa Rica with Victor and Arley has been using basically private funding to develop this. And now with the University of Massachusetts, we are trying through Café Solar create a market incentive So people like all you, who support this transformation using basically market forces. But there is no, so far, a government support from anywhere, U.S. or Costa Rica. Or right now we are putting a new facility in Honduras. It will be the first coffee mill that will use 100% renewable energy. It's an industrial facility, but everything is done with private monies. There is no government support at all.
Different topic, but somewhere during the film there is commentary about birds losing their lives during the migration, not at the destination and not where they winter. And I was wondering what happens to birds during hurricanes? Like the last hurricane we heard, I heard that there were flocks of terns in Concord and some other kind of, I don't remember what the other bird was, but it was a seabird that ended up here that ended up dying. But is that part of the problem, the changes in the courses of the storms? Just interested in what birds do during a hurricane.
Birds can do a couple of things. A lot of birds are just aware of things enough to get out of the way. They're much more sensitive to environmental, pressure changes and stuff. So, whoa, here comes a hurricane, hunker down. There was some colleagues from Virginia were satellite tracking whimbrel, which is a shorebird, kind of the size of a crow, from Hudson's Bay to the Caribbean, and they landed in the Bahamas, and the hurricane went over the Bahamas, and it kept on going a few days later. So they just can avoid that stuff. The question about, certainly some birds, especially seabirds, that's what got dumped up here, birds get moved around by winds. Probably a small proportion actually get displaced like that. The birds found dead in Claremont, there was a southern hemisphere tropic bird landing there. But for the most part, they're pretty able to deal with it, and they've been dealing with hurricanes for a long time, obviously. The other part of the question is, as these storm tracks change and get more intense with climate change, what's that can happen? We really don't know. But if these things happen during critical stopovers, like Cape May, like in the movie, or on the Gulf Coast, and there's a pile of birds waiting to cross, you could have a pretty serious, mortality event. The real question that we don't know the answer to is, you might have guessed, we don't have a clue most of the time what goes on during migration in terms of exact mortality. We just know that's where it happens. So, there's a lot of work still to be done with that radar type stuff in terms of where the safe habitats are. If all those coastal habitats get wiped out for, development in the U.S., then there's fewer places for those birds to settle down to be safe during bad weather, for example. Does that kind of answer it?
I have a friend who actually works for the Nature Conservancy in Cape May, and he's doing work with geolocators, this very cool instrument that you attach to a bird. And over the course of an entire year, you have to recapture the bird and take that geolocator off. But it gives you the sunrise and sunset of every day that the bird is gone for the entire year. And then you can infer what the latitude and longitude is of that bird over that entire time. This is a really strong new technology because it's allowing for linkages, like Pete Mara was talking about in the film, between the breeding grounds and the non-breeding grounds. He told me, he's working with willets, a lot of you know what willets are, and he told me that there's some thought that willets may leave as early as July 1 for the wintering grounds, because that way they can avoid the greatest amount of hurricane weather. And as much as what Pam just said is true, hurricanes are probably certainly a source of mortality, because while birds can predict weather a lot better than we can, there's still going to be these fast-moving systems that catch them off guard. I know that, for example, in a long-term misbanding study in southern Puerto Rico, the year after Katrina, and there was another hurricane in that year, wasn't there? Yeah. It was pretty severe also. And when those two hurricanes came through the Caribbean basin and moved west to the U.S., that year after, they had a tremendous decrease in the number of birds they caught in these misband lanes. So it's anecdotal. We don't know that that was because of the hurricanes, but it's a pretty tight link.
I can't resist observing that those birds that turned up in Concord had taken a turn for the worst.
Hey, Willem, while you have the microphone, what happened to Peter Marin and that coastal property? Is it concrete or is it still a sanctuary?
Still a sanctuary, but it's still a sanctuary, but I'll tell you, Peter's got an uphill pull on that tug of war. The government of Jamaica is flying to Spain, all the ministers, to talk with the potential developer, a Spanish developer, to come in and put in a 2,400 room resort with an 18-hole golf course and an airport, which is, it's amazing to me that they can even think of sustaining because of the lack of water. There's not enough groundwater now for the people who live there. It's going to be interesting, but we'll see. All we can do is support poor Pete. He's a Dartmouth man too.
And the slight glimmer of hope is that that battle's been going on for at least a decade, and they haven't built it yet, so.
What I have is not so much a question for anyone specifically, but a thought to share. We're focused here greatly on habitat loss in the southern wintering grounds, whether it's the Caribbean or some other southern place. And we have the advantage of living in New Hampshire, where so many of those migratory songbirds return to raise their families. And the question is, why do they come here? Well, maybe they were born here and they came back here. But the big answer to that is because of the natural food source. Habitat, to some degree, yes, but the natural food source for all of those infant critters, and I wish you could tell me how a mother hummingbird manages to feed her babies without skewering them with that beak, because that's something I really need an answer to. But anyway, I want to make my pitch. I'm on a little bit of a soapbox here. And when people get hairy about, oh, we can't stand these black flies, we can't stand these mosquitoes, we've got to spray, we've got to get these things out of here, I can't play golf because the bugs drive me nuts. Those you have to reframe and say to yourself, bugs are bird food. And you have to love the bugs, or at least tolerate them, because if you decide you're going to spray for whatever they are, triple A, quadruple A, whatever, bird flu, whatever, you're going to do that. We'll be right back to the DDT times. And a lot of us know what that was about, and some of you young people probably have no clue. Okay, that's the first rant. The second rant has to do with habitat change, not through destruction, but just through the normal progression. I've been in the same place for 30 years, and the bird populations where I have been observing for 30 years have definitely changed, but so has the habitat, because the little things that were shrubby growth areas that were near the water sources have grown up, and the mature tree forest has gotten even more mature with virtually no undergrowth and very little bird activity there. And the place where I am is bordered on the west and the north by the White Mountain National Forest. So when it comes to habitat possibilities, it's almost endless. So I'd really be interested to hear, since you people are so involved on a level that I'm not, what you think about A, bugs for bird food, and B, habitat that is not being destroyed, but is simply going through the natural progression and therefore tends to limit the bird species that used to be there 30 years ago, but have gone to find a place that's more like what they wanted 30 years ago.
One quick comment.
How's that? Be quiet.
Bugs are bird food and people are bug food. When you do this line of work, I remember this guy when he first started out, when he was a greenhorn, he had to get his titer up for bug fly bites. He came back one day and his whole face was red and bulgy. And anybody who works on birds knows that birds love to be in places that are extremely filled with biting insects. And so that's a big part of this kind of work, and you just sort of learn to just deal with it. But as far as your other point, habitat comes in a lot of varieties, and those different varieties are created in a lot of different ways through natural processes. So I think what you were alluding to is the fact that, you know, forests can grow older and you don't get the same kind of diversity of habitats if all the forests we have are mature forests or at some later stage of succession. And I'd like to turn it over to Pam, because I know that she knows a lot more about this at our state level, and she knows about the species associations with different habitats, and she did her own thesis work on some of that.
Yeah, succession happens. That's a bumper sticker, I think, that we should keep it aware of. And by succession, I mean exactly what that woman was saying, is that shrubby habitats grow into bigger habitats. And as a result, things that use shrubby habitats disappear and look for shrubby habitats somewhere else, whether they're from a tornado, or an ice storm, or floods, or something else. And I could go on and on and on about what I call my shrubland soapbox, but we probably don't have time for that. But it is important to realize that these habitats change on their own, and we've come in and thrown a big wrench into that and altered how those habitats do change as well. So she's lucky to be in the White Mountains, but shrublands in Hillsborough County are now shopping malls, irrespective of whether they could have grown up or not. So on the bigger scale of things, we've got really nice conservation areas in New Hampshire, and hopefully some of those areas where these natural disturbance events can happen to maintain those habitats, because they've been here for as long as there's been trees here. Trees fall down, shrubs grow up, so those birds are there. So the sort of the long-term answer to that question is, you know, we just need to be able to make, the short answer maybe, so don't get too carried away, is that we need to be able to ensure that these natural processes occur at a scale that allows a variety of habitats, and in places where those shrubby habitats are maybe, you know, really rare, you know, we might have to actually manage for them. You know, people like Extension, Fish and Game, various agencies and stuff will actually go out there and make, you know, early successional habitats to allow critters that live there to maintain themselves. And the scale at which we need to do that, you know, we really don't know the answer to that yet. But, you know, you do need that mix, and if we stopped any of that, we'd have no shrublands eventually, except for in power lines, and that would make a difference in what kind of birds we have. We don't know what the answer is, but there's a mix.
Yeah, one other comment is that people tend to feel more comfortable when they're in forests that are tidy. But birds don't like tidy forests. Birds like really messy forests, and the harder it is to tromp through a forest, the more bird diversity you're likely to have, or at least the more of certain types of bird species will occur in those forests. So it's a mistake to keep your forest, if you are lucky enough to own some forest, it's a mistake to keep it so tidy.
Thank you.
Hi, I was just wondering, is anyone looking into the possibility of light pollution or the growth of the landscaping industry as possible causes?
Could you raise the mic, please? Yes, we can't hear you. Go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Oh, good.
Okay. Is anyone looking into the possibility that that light pollution or that the growth of the landscaping industry is affecting bird population?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by landscaping, but other than the fact that it messes up what used to be habitat and makes it lawn, which is great for robins and chirping sparrows. But as far as light pollution goes, you know, there was that great little segment in the movie about, you know, the lights in urban areas. There's a whole program called Lights Out. It's active in several cities in North America, including Boston. We just had a discussion, I think, was it today, Becky? About, you know, maybe you weren't at the meeting yet, about trying to do that, something like that in Manchester. Lots of neat stuff. In fact, there's a neat tie-in to the 9/11 thing, because people are probably familiar with the what's it called, Tribute and Light, those two giant beams that get blasted up from ground zero. I think it's on the anniversary, I can't remember, unfortunately. There's actually partnerships now with New York City Audubon where they monitor birds in those beams, because they come in, they get disoriented, they start flying in circles, just go watch it and say, there's too many birds in the beam, and they turn it off. To let those birds disperse out and then turn it back on again for the duration of the configuration. So there's lots of things going on with that. It's sort of more of a city by city, because you can't just simply tell the entire country to turn its lights off. thought that'd be kind of cool. We'd probably have chaos. But I'm not sure what your landscaping question was, or if anybody else wants to say anything about light.
Well, you might be alluding to how much lawn there is, or?
Yeah, well, the industry of landscaping care has grown corresponding to the time frame that you said in the show that the bird population, the songbird population, had started to decrease. So in the 70s and 80s, the bird population was at one level and now it's half. Well, the lawn care industry has grown in a similar way. And I was wondering if anyone's looking at that.
You know, there also, I think there were 2 billion or 2.5 billion people on Earth in 1950, and now there's 7. So that's a big factor too. But it is hideous, really, the whole manner in which we've enculturated people to feel like they have to have a carpet outside their house. And there's a colleague of mine who's actually working kind of hard on trying to analyze lawn care behavior to see if it can be changed, because it could have a huge environmental impact if people will grow different types of plants in what used to be lawn. There's a woman who wrote a book, Sarah Stein, called Noah's Garden. She talks a lot about that, and she has this little diagram, pencil drawing at the end of the book, where a cul-de-sac now has lots of different habitat. And it's a whole different scene for a host of different bird species. Like Pam said, chipping sparrows and robins do fine in lawns, you know, but they probably would do better in a lawn like mine, where we never use chemicals, and we probably have about 30 or 40 species in that lawn. It doesn't look like Better Homes and Gardens, you know. It looks great when I first mow it, but then it grows at different rates. But the point is that it's much more species diverse than when you start putting chem lawn on it and all of that. It's a good point.
Some of the movie that you saw had to do with Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, which is on the part of the White Mountain National Forest. And the fact is that a good part of Hubbard Brook is a managed situation where research and the Forest Service goes in and harvests trees and tries to deal with not only watershed research, but trying to research the effect of these different habitats, young age, medium age, old age, on bird populations. And we're lucky to have the White Mountain National Forest, but the fact is that the majority of forest land in New Hampshire is privately owned. And with the budget problems that we have now, one of the situations that we have here in New Hampshire is that we have county foresters in each county and a wildlife specialist that goes around and helps private landowners manage their land and helps them to develop wildlife habitat. We're losing 2 of our county foresters now because the funding comes through the University of New Hampshire and the state, and they're not funding anymore. So, you know, we have to look at our own forests here to ensure that those forests are protected, that they're managed, and that all the benefits that come from forests that we continue to have. So you need to look at organizations in your own state to make sure that we protect birds here, not only in Central America and places, but there are many organizations like the Rainforest Alliance, the Joko Toko Foundation in Ecuador, many organizations that are doing wonderful work. And you can go online and find out what these are. And they're the organizations to help put some money into them and help them survive and help them protect the birds that we so much love here.
The comment about private, how much forest in New Hampshire is in private ownership is a very important one. It's okay if, say, 15 to 20% of private landowners who harvest timber off of their forests do it without using best management practices by kind of slaughtering it and clear cutting it, so long as the other 80 to 85% are not doing that. But if more and more people get greedy and they're over harvesting, then we lose what might be considered a mosaic. I know that in our own town there are people who hit their forests pretty hard, but then there's a lot of other private owners that are pretty soft, and that ends up being an interesting mosaic. But if everybody starts hitting it hard, that's a problem. And with the reduction in county foresters, there's less people who have the access to the experts who can tell them that there are better ways to even make more money off of your land over the long term if you don't hit it so hard.
This is for Phil. What inspired you to tell this story, and what were some of your challenges?
It was Pam's report on the state of New Hampshire songbirds, and just reading it, I was intrigued by what causes the decline in bird populations, and really not so much focused on that, but what people are doing to address those concerns and challenges throughout the migratory route. And what was the second part of the question?
What were some of your challenges?
Working with Willem is probably the biggest. He's all fun and games until he's in the back seat of a car in Jamaica and or Costa Rica, then he gets nasty. The challenge is just really limiting. There's so much great work going on, so many people dedicated. I mean, the people who work with birds, as most of you probably know, I mean, you yourself, if you're just out watching birds, you go through great hardships and early morning and standing around. But the people who are working are crawling around the floors of the forests and sleeping out in outposts and just experiencing what appears to be hardships for the sake of knowing more about birds. And I was just very impressed by, I'm impressed by people who work with birds, and they do it not only for their own interests, but for all who enjoy birds or will enjoy birds, the future generations, so they can continue that.
You mentioned that approximately 85% of the birds during migration disappear. What do we know about wind farms and their effect on bird movement? Thank you.
Well, there have been some studies that have looked at or tried to measure as best possible direct mortality from the propellers. In different places, some in Europe, some in the western, well, on the west side of the Atlantic. I think most of those studies find that the percent of any species population that actually has direct mortality from wind generation is quite small. And so that's kind of a challenging issue, because Nick is the person who talked about 85% of the birds dying en route. Nick Rodenhouse is a good friend of Pam's and mine. I forgot what I was going to say.
Tricky question.
Yeah. Right, that's right. Nick also talked a lot about, and the main hypotheses that he and Scott Stillett are testing up in Howard Brook have to do with using black-throated blue warbler populations at different elevations as a proxy for what could happen with climate change. And so wind is a clean energy, and that's what makes it a tough issue. Because to say, well, we have 2-3% mortality of a particular species from wind generation, and that's probably high. Should we close down developing more wind, when in fact, you know, the alternative is to keep burning fossil fuel? Well, that's not the only alternative. There are many alternatives, but so it gets tricky. I know that I have a graduate student working on a project up north, in the northern part of the state, where they're putting in 33 wind turbines, and he's working on the effects of that on the big-nosed thrush population up there. Because wind sites in a lot of places around the state coincide quite closely with ideal big-nosed thrush habitat. So it's a tough call. I know that we brought some of the folks who are writing the book on big-nosed thrush from Vermont, Chris Rimmer and Kent McFarland, up to that site, and they, I'm not going to say, I shouldn't say what they said, but they did say that they thought there were a lot of big-nosed thrush on that site, and that the impact was probably not going to be that big.
Locations.
I don't know if that was a surprise, but yeah, that's what they thought.
And just a quick follow-up to the, because there's two pieces to wind. There's birds getting whacked as they migrate south, and there's birds losing habitat because we built the thing, which is what the big-nosed thrush is about. And just as a little word of caution, even though we think mortality is low, if we do complete build-out with wind, that's a lot more wind turbines and therefore a lot more mortality. And what we don't really know is to what extent birds can avoid these. Evidence from Europe, where they've had wind installations for a lot longer, does suggest that birds start avoiding them. What the physiological costs on migration are for that, it's just a little cascading effect of uncertainty. The mortality does tend to be low, with a few exceptions. It depends on the sighting. If the site is in a really nasty place, people have probably heard about Altamont Pass in California, this big, beautiful prairie thing. Raptors like perching on those because there's also little ground squirrels underneath them, and then white raptors become dead raptors. So there's a lot of, stuff going on, trying to sort out which sites are best. It's a compromise between where the resource is, how much resource we need, what the habitat is, what the mortality is. It's really an emerging field, but we're poking at it in various ways. Hope that answers.
And like those folks in the film from Cape May, there might be a strategy that could be developed where at certain critical times of migration, the wind could be turned off. It could be a couple of, not the wind, So that could be another strategy that emerges.
Are they attracted because of the height that the altitude that they fly, or the lights, or the birds when they're migrating?
Right. Most birds, when they're actively migrating, are relatively high up. Most wind towers, although they're getting bigger and bigger, aren't quite in the normal range. But when you're at ridge lines, birds are often a little lower because of cloud cover, and they more likely to hit them. They're not lit. Well, I don't know a lot about this. Sometimes they are. I haven't been through a wind farm at night, so I can't remember. But if lights would actually be worse, because a lot of information, birds get disoriented by little blinking lights and things on top of radio towers, and
Are they less attracted to red?
There's something, I can't remember, that might be right. It's either one of them, and blinking and non-blinking, I'm not totally up on that, but there are issues with lights, and there's ways of using light, actually, if you have got to have light on something to make it less nasty for birds, but I can't remember, unfortunately, what the answer to that is.
They're still studying it.
They're still studying it, my colleague says.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's data showing whether or not bird numbers returning, bird numbers returning to New England are down, or whether or not production is down, or both.
Yes.
Both.
Oh, I just wanted to make another comment. There are a number of thoughts going around, ranging from sustainable forestry to towers. And personally, I don't think wind towers are really where you should be focusing. It's really these telecommunication towers that Pam alluded to. And the blinking lights, I believe right now the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is suggesting red strobes, not pulsing lights, and definitely not white lights. A lot of these birds are migrating using stars for orientation. they're getting confused, especially during poor weather conditions when they're forced to fly low. And again, with regards to the towers and the wind turbines, it's not so much songbirds, but it's the raptors, again, as Pam alluded to. So,
And bats.
my 2 cents, sorry.
And it's worth noting, people may have heard about bat declines, we won't get too far on a tangent, but bats are much more at risk from wind turbine mortality than birds are.
We have about 10 more minutes if there's anyone with another question. No? Well,
Bird call, somebody.
Since this topic is saving songbirds, the next question I think that would be obvious would be, what can we do, each as individuals, to try to help save songbirds, and where can we find information about how to do that? Is there a link to a website about the show that gives a list of ideas for what people can do, for instance?
And we can also mention that if you didn't pick one up at the front desk, we have the new, if they want to throw it up there again, we strongly encourage you getting it. It's also on the Audubon website. Which is,
section on what you can do.
yeah, there's a whole section in this new document that says what you can do. Is like 5-6 pages, and it talks about coffee, it talks about keeping your cat indoors, it talks about supporting your land trusts, managing your land. Everything that's been tossed out today, hopefully we've covered. If it becomes something new, we'll have to reissue it, but it's pretty comprehensive. Everything, you can do if you're an elected official, if you're really good friends with the elected official, if you own a building in downtown Manchester, you name it, there's something you can do. It's pretty small. Looks like the person who's giving out coffee has left, but that's a mixed blessing, because then they're going to use that land for... If everybody gave up coffee, guess what they're going to grow? Pineapples, bananas, something that's even worse. So, you got to keep those sort of things in mind. Local agriculture, I see Ruth up there. Lots of things you can do. So it's not a hopeless cause, but if everybody did something, you'd be better off.
Yeah, I'll just also comment that I'm sure most people in this room have thought of this, but the typical North American consumption pattern is no friend to birds. So whatever a person can do to reduce their consumption pattern, it's the lifestyles of North Americans that drive the greater amount of habitat destruction in both the North, Central, and South America. So that's an important point, I think. I could say so myself.
Thank you. I just want to extend about what you were saying in terms of consumption, which is basically the premise what lies behind Café Solar as a way to use market forces to change consumption and selection of products that will actually protect the environment and habitats and change the use of energy. So that is the fundamental premise here with the University of Massachusetts and the U.S. It's a Wildlife Service to increase more research and implementation of IOC, the Integrated Open Canopy method that you saw in the video, in order to use market forces to change basically how we are taking care of the planet.
Well, if there's no one else, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I did want to mention a couple things. This will air on New Hampshire Public Television on October 5th at 8 o'clock and multiple times throughout the month of October. So if you did enjoy the film, please tell your friends and others. And I also wanted to mention, this is public broadcasting, and we rely on your support and the support of foundations to make this possible. So this entire work was made possible by the Butler Foundation, and if you'd all please acknowledge Clara Butler's in the back of